All right, so let's move on. End of year four certification process. So just like in end of year three, if you've attended yesterday's training, the end of year four certification workflow is the same since it involves both the LEA and SELPA coordination and approvals. So obviously, you submit all of your end of year four related data and of course your student profile changes, right? Any student enrollment changes, you submit all of those to CalPads. You then go on and resolve any certification errors and CDDs. Once a snapshot starts running and presents to you all of the errors that you need to resolve based on the data that you have submitted to CalPads. And then once you've resolved those errors, then of course you review the reports. So you can skip number two and go ahead and look at your reports because any student that triggers any error in CalPads will not be included on any of your certification reports. So if it takes longer for you to resolve errors, then be it. I mean, you have to coordinate with your SPED person or you have to reach out to us to be able to help you resolve the errors before going into the review stat. Now, let's say you've corrected all of your errors and now you're in the review mode. Who do you need to involve with, right? You need to involve, this data, although it's you who approves the data. This data is essentially data that has to be reviewed by your SPED person. So you review, you share the data, have them approve it. If they sign off on all of the reports that are in your certification, then go ahead and approve it. Now, you need to have coordination. By now, SPED collection has been ongoing since what, 4 years, 5 years now. So by now, you should have already established a good workflow and data sharing and relationship with your SPED person. So once all of that is done, obviously you have to approve your certification, your do the LEA approval, and then once the LEA approve button is clicked, CalPAS obviously will notify your SELPA that your data is ready for their approval as well. If they approve it, then that's the end of year four process and certification. And if you've approved it together with your N of three, then obviously you're ready for vacation, right? So that's just the summary of what is expected throughout this end of year four submission. All right, so with that, let me just go and share my screen. So again, the training for the certification is for the certification process is available in CalPads. You just go to the CalPads YouTube channel and there are two versions of it. One is a short version, which involves Alex explaining to you the process and the cause and effect when picking different revision status. Let me just bring that here, the forefront. Let's go to the YouTube channel and then we just type under error correction, certification errors, validation, the basics. It's probably here. So you have two videos. One is the lengthy one, 25-minute video with Nate, who explains to you the entire certification process that I will be demoing. And then, of course, a shorter one presented by Alex that explains the cause and effect based and the functionality and the use of the revision status. So let's just copy that, put it here if you are not aware of that training. So let's go back to our demo here. So let's just be ABC Unified today. Okay. If you are ABC Unified, this we are in the test environment. And so any data here is essentially fictitious. So don't worry, we're not sharing your students' personal information. So we go to certification. And for end of year, we have obviously the end of year four certification here. So you have your revision status, or at least the default revision status that will appear based on what CalPads selects, right? If you go to the CalPads user manual and go to and look for the certification status, there is a hierarchy that you have to be aware of that CalPads picks depending on the different scenarios that you have. So these here are the different revision status that you have, versions that you have. And based on all of the variations, CalPads will pick a default status. So I'll show you why this is important when analyzing your or looking at your data. So let's go back to the demo here. So again, we go to end of year 4. So I just need some coffee today. And of course, you have your certification details page. So you have here the summary of the default certification or default revision status that is presented to you. You have the revision create date, the revision ID, the CDD run begin date, and CDD run complete date, which represents the data discrepancy refresh that got picked up by the snapshot process. Okay. So let's say so the snap for those who are new to CalPads or who are SPED folks who are not aware of the CalPads process. So CalPads has a snapshot revision that starts running when the end of year submission is started. So for this year, it's on May 6th. So the snapshot will start running based on the data that you have. The snapshot um, normally would need to make sure that your data is there is an existing data that or changes, and then of course it will only run if it detects idleness in the system. At least for your LEA, it picks up the data and then it runs all of these validations and presents it into a revised and certified status, right? So based on this snapshot revision, you have here the reports that you will be reviewing, right? So now there is also at the same time another process that is running based on real-time correction of your data. So if someone submitted corrections or someone submitted updates to SPED data, then CalPads will start running that, and that is basically any errors, any validations, any inconsistencies on the data is presented through the data discrepancy. Okay, so the data discrepancy runs quicker or refreshes quicker than the snapshot revision. So any change you make here after an hour or two, give or take, it will update and you will have a newer run start time and completion time. And let's say if this ran and then you also had a snapshot that ran, this would be representative of that refresh. Okay. So that's what this provides you. Okay. So this is crucial because sometimes you know how CalPads works, especially close to the deadline, the system gets bogged down by all of the data being introduced, any corrections in the system, and so there is some latency. So it takes longer for the snapshots to run, and you may already have created multiple changes, and the data refresh in the data discrepancy may have ran multiple times, or let's say you made changes and then the snapshot only picked up partial changes. And so you would still have, even though you see here in the data discrepancy that you no longer have errors, your snapshot may still list CDDs even after a new revision is created. So just be aware of that. Also, this is the revision status, right? So every time a snapshot is generated, if you haven't LEA approved or self approved a revision, this would be your default revision. Now, if let's say you brought your errors down to zero, right? And so now you say, okay, it's all zero, and I don't want this more errors to get introduced. and I just want to have someone review the reports. So you can freeze this version by checking this box in review uncertified. So what does that do? It freezes this version as well as the version of the reports that you have here. And then you can then, have your SPED person, any of the data stakeholders to review that data, those reports. Now, maybe while you have this frozen, changes were made, then CalPAS will start, running and refreshing the system and generating a new snapshot, which by then you will have two versions of revision. The one that you've frozen, which is in review and certified, and a new revised and certified version. So any changes you make, if you have a SELPA approved, LA approved, in review, any frozen data, if you have any changes in the system and you generate a new snapshot, just switch this and pick the revised and certified version. Just be aware that CalPAS, refreshes longer than expected, and so you may think you've already, switched to the correct version, but you still have you have to make sure that you've switched to a new revised and certified version and see by verifying the revision ID and the create date. So that's just how it is. And then of course, in this section, it will identify who your SELPA is. So ABC Unified has their own SELPA. So they have this in here. There are LAs who have multiple SELPAs. I believe Santa Clara County has multiple SELPAs. So there would be multiple SELPAs who will need to approve this report. Okay. And then you have also the validations or certification errors that will appear if you still have data that are uncorrected. So if you notice here, you have errors with the prefix of the file types. So these are called CDDs. Now, these essentially are errors that manifest if you haven't worked on your data discrepancies. Okay, so these are the same errors. If you haven't, fixed this, and a snapshot runs, then of course those errors will get added into this mix. Okay. Then of course you also have warnings. Although this won't prevent you from certifying, it is a good habit to review the warnings, see why there are warnings and fix it. Because sometimes, it's just a warning. However, if if it then if you have additional errors, or this then adds up to more errors later on, then it's more a habit of making sure that you have accurate information in CalPETs, right? All right, that's the errors. And then of course, if let's say you've corrected all of your CDDs, all of this cleared, you have zero errors, then you may go on and review the certification reports. So you only have three aggregate reports that you will need, or that is expected to be reviewed and certified, right? So once you review each report, this will turn into a green check mark, and then CalPAS will then um, bring up a box which you need to check, saying you agree that all of the information on the reports that you reviewed are accurate. And now if you agree, you have to check that box, and then you have to click on the LAA approve button that will appear here. The LAA approve button will be grayed out even though you have a green check mark, and unless you check that I agree button. So we always emphasize that just don't look at the counts. You also have to review the list, right? So it goes to say you have to review 6 reports, send it to your SPED person, send it to that way they can review the list of students. And if they say they agree that everyone is accounted for, then you can LA approved. And then once you are LA approved, the SELPA will get a notification that you've approved your end of year 4 reports, right? And so now, as the SELPA, I would go here and then review the reports on the SELPA level. If you are a SELPA and you need guidance on how each of these reports were arrived at or the counts were arrived at, you may refer to the CalPAS user manual, go to the report mapping guide, and then go to the SELPA mapping guide reports. If you are an LEA, go to the snapshot reports. So for LEAs, you may refer to the snapshot reports, go to end of year 4, and you have the same reports here. Each report has, the different business rules, who gets included on the report, and then what counts are included on here. Okay. And for the SELPA, that's the same thing. You click on your SELPA version, and it gives you a mapping guide, a guide on what each column represent. Okay. So once you review that, your SELPA reviews it, then obviously they need to approve. So they just have to then, I mean, if you are LA approved here, then there would be an action here that says approve. Or if I am El Dorado County Charter, which I have probably, let's say, 50 LEAs to approve, then that charter, SELPA charter, can do a mass approval. You just have to check each box and then click on approve selected. Okay. So that's basically how the approval process is, and the user interface appears in CalPAS for each of the organization levels. All right, so of course, the approval won't happen if we don't resolve errors, right? So let's be ABC unified. Go to end of year 4. So right now, CalPADs, the snapshots in CalPAS for end of year hasn't been activated yet. It won't get activated until May 6. And so, as I've mentioned earlier, you guys need to be proactive. You can do that by already looking at your data discrepancies. So go to data discrepancies, filter for end of year 4, and it will provide you the current data discrepancies that you have based on the current data, that SPED data that you have in CalPADS, and PSTS data as well. And of course, enrollment data, right? So we have here one student. Just filter for this student. So this student triggered two errors. One is SCNR 0606E4 and SCNR 439E4. The 0606E4 is a common issue in CalPAD, especially when a student moves from one LEA to another and the subsequent LEA are missing some key pieces in with regards to the SPED, required SPED data. Okay, so let's look at SCNR 0606E4. When troubleshooting errors, you have to have some handy tools, right? If I have kids, they grew up watching Handy Manny. He has all of these tools. Or if you watch that Disney movie with Mr. Fix-It, he has a hammer, right? So you guys need some tools to be able to equip you in analyzing all of these errors, and also creating and resolving these errors and coordinating with your SPED person. So your common tool would be your CalPAS error list. Right now, we have CalPAS error list version 16.16. So this is the spreadsheet version, right? If you are a person who wants to filter, wants more flexibility, and are adept with spreadsheets, then this download this and go to end of year 4, and you would see all of the errors listed here. So we still included errors from prior years that are already retired. So it is important that you filter the inactive column to just show inactive no. And as you can see, these are all the errors that we have active this year. All right. So you could do that, or you could just click on this, which is my favorite because it brings us to the user manual, right? So clicking on the number would help you, it brings up a version of the error list that is web-based, right? The good thing about this is that it provides you, additional information. If there are any active defects pertaining to this error, then you should be able to see it here. Then sometimes we have errors. Nate creates all of these useful YouTube videos with regards to troubleshooting errors. And those errors are normally, those videos are normally embedded here as well. And so you may want to check this functionality in CalPETS. So let's look at the error. It's stating that SENR 0606E4 error. There is a You are missing a plan record for an enrolled and eligible participating student with disabilities. Says here the error description. Enrolled, eligible, and participating students should have a current education plan. Okay. So the fields being validated are, of course, the enrollment. If you have the student enrolled at your district, then you should on the hook on reporting the required SPED information. So it also looks at the SWDS record of that student, okay, and the eligibility, right? So so you have a suggested resolution as well. So what this error says is that if you have a student enrolled at your district who has an active, eligible, and participating SWDS status, okay? It might not be a record that you reported in CalPAS before. It could be from the previous district. But since a student is eligible and participating, CalPAS will expect a meet and a plan record associated to your district. Okay. So let's go back to this student and click on her SSID. So we have Nike Cortez enrolled on July 5th this year. And if we go to the student with disabilities, education meeting, plan, and services. This was your student, Nate, the one that you presented earlier that has some sus records.
Yeah.
The record is sus. There's some process flow for this LA, for our LA is mid. I'm just reminded me of my kids' language these days. So anyway, what do we have to look at here? So it says that you have an enrollment. The student indeed has an eligible and participating status, which was reported by Capistrano Unified. And they have a meeting, they have a plan. However, since you already own the student is at your district, then you have to tell us if the student uh, is being provided services based on the assumption that this student is eligible and participating. Okay. All right. So what do you need to do? Number one, ask if the student is still eligible or participating. Check with the student, check with your SPED folks. Okay. That's the key element here. You can just go ahead and just submit the meeting and plan record without knowing if the student is still eligible or participating. Because what if the student no longer is eligible and Capistrano just forgot to end that status last year? Or, yeah, when was this? In 2021, right? So that's the thing. So you have to then check with your SPED person. And if your SPED person says, oh, yeah, this student is no longer eligible, right? So if that's the case, when was the student not eligible? It turns out the student was not eligible at the time they were still in Capistrano. So you can do two things. You can reach out to Capistrano if they lost eligibility during this enrollment. Then Capistrano has to temporarily open this enrollment to be able to close this record, right? They have to submit a meeting record. They have to submit to show the loss of eligibility that they met and they lost eligibility. And then they also have to put a status here, a new status saying the student is no longer eligible, or the student is eligible but refused to participate at the end of the year. Okay. So with that, then that gets you off the hook with regards to reporting the student, right? However, if the student is eligible, you still have to internally on your SPED site be able to reach out to the parents and ask if they want to be provided services, right? So if the parents agree that the student, you know, wants to receive services now that they are at ABC Unified, then you have to report the record at your district, report a meeting that to just an evidence that you met with the parent. You have to then report a plan record, SWD status stating that the student is again eligible and participating, and then you have to then report the plan record for this year, right? So the key elements here, what are the key elements? Number one, the special education status code. Number two, you have to have the meeting that matches that new status code of eligible participating at your district. Those dates should match. And then number three, your plan record should match the effective start date. So all these dates should match each other if you are introducing your first records to CalPAS for the student. Then obviously that date should be within your enrollment too, because it doesn't make sense to report this if the dates are off, except for the meeting. Sometimes if the meeting was at was done during the summer, then the meeting date should be maybe off, maybe different. But then again, make sure that the effective dates for the SWDS status and the plan should be within your enrollment. And these two should at least be matching, at least for the first reporting cycle for your LEA. So bottom line here, if you picked up a student mid-year or close any point during their enroll during the academic year, make sure that you have those records appropriately updated. Now, if the student is eligible and participating, then obviously you just have to report a meet and a plan record. Okay? So for the meet, you just have to pick up probably is it an adapt thing or maybe the plan. The plan would just be, if you haven't met the student, if there's no assessment done yet, but you have to report the student as eligible and they are receiving services, then you have to just adapt the record from Capistrano, making sure that the dates align within your enrollment. Nate had that file type relationships at the start of the session. So that is also a key element here. You have to make sure that those dates would be within the enrollment period. All right, that's for the SENR 0606. Now let's go to the other error that she has. So the same student, adult age students with disabilities in transition status is required for this record. All right, so if we go back to the student, again, the reason why the adult, any SPED related information is required is because the student is flagged as eligible and participating. It doesn't have to be at your district or reported by your district. As long as the student is eligible and participating, then, of course, you have to fix this, right? Let's I jump a step here. So let's go back here and click on the error code. So adult age students with disabilities in transition status is required for this record. So if a student is a student with disabilities, is at least 17 years old and is in grade 12, then adult age indicator is required. So it says here, if a student is a student with disability as identified by the overlapping SWDS eligible and participating and plan record, then you are expected to mark this student as either a yes or no, at least for the transition indicator. Okay, so let's go to that student's record. True enough, you still have this active, even though it's not your student. It's not your record, I mean. So you have to go here and mark this as yes or no. Okay, so double checking. The birth date is 2022, 2025, 22 years old. So yeah. So basically the student is beyond 17, and so this student has to have that enrollment record transition indicator mark to be a yes or no. If you're providing the services, then yes. If not, then no. Or again, it boils down to that SPED status. If you fix this, then you'll be fixing two errors with one stone, right? So two birds with one stone, so to speak. So you'll be shooting two birds with one stone. So essentially, if the student is no longer eligible and participating, then if this is corrected, then you don't have to adjust this, the indicator here. Now, if the student is indeed still eligible and participating, then you have to add your necessary records here, plus making sure that the adult indicator is marked as yes. Okay. Right. So those are two errors that are common with regards to end of year, at least for SPED reporting for the CDDs. So if you go to your data discrepancy records now or page and you see those 06, 06, 04s, I suggest you first work on those, because by working on those, it will affect any other validations that are required or expected for it will clear any validations based on any changes you make on the SPED side. Right? Do we have any questions, Nate? Do you have any recommendation if the private refuses to update the record? Well, hand-to-hand combat. You could, yeah, Alex probably had one. He had to go to SoCal and basically confronted at LEA. But joking aside, if that doesn't happen, a workaround is basically just adding a meet record and a plan record at your district equal to the first day of school. The plan record would be the first day in school and making sure that the student is marked as not eligible and not participating, or eligible but not participating. Okay. So you can do that on your own. You can be proactive. The student was a SPED student during COVID years. So that's like 3 years ago. If Capistrano is unable to change the record, or you know you don't get any response from them, what you could do is be proactive as well and just create that meeting, create the student with disabilities record, making sure as long as the start date is within the enrollment, then you should be okay.
Um, in the enrollment record, Karen, can
Yes,
you show Charlene the transition indicator?
this one, Charlene. It's at the bottom. So you have adult age students with disabilities in transition status.
Yeah, it catches everybody because it's particular to special education, but it's in the
Yeah,
enrollment.
yeah.
And then Kimberly asks for best practice for 1 day enrollments for for students who are students with disabilities that are eligible and participating. They enroll the student and the student leaves before they can adopt a plan. And so I think early identification is the best practice. The
Mhm.
registrars, when they are enrolling students, need to find a way to incorporate looking in CalPads the students to verify, you know, many things, if not if they're students with disabilities. Um, the SENR enrollment extract identifies students with disabilities now. So when you are enrolling this student, you can request the extract and it will tell you.
Mhm.
I mean, given that you're talking about 1 day enrollments, it's going to be hard to catch all of them.
Yeah.
They're going to come and go. But I think just incorporating some type of CalPADS research in early identification to those who are actually doing the enrolling is best.
And then there's always, you have different scenarios with regards to your SPED student. So you can rely on this, the submission scenarios. It provides you, the different enrollment, your submission scenarios. You also have, I have all of this. Let's see here. It pays to, be able to, if you're not a SPED person, it pays to still have all of this SPED boxes available for you. Because so this is for the um, office hours. If you don't attend it, but you still would like to know what's being, you know, shared, that's the office hours box. Because this the SPED department has a unlimited CD boxes that in their disposal. So you
I'm
have to,
I think you guys know better than me, but I think if you are the data coordinator,
yeah,
you have to know all things CalPADS. You can't
yeah,
afford not to know. And I
yeah,
think going to the SPED office hours, the weekly Q&As, is a lot of time consuming things. And I know everyone has to multitask, but if you could listen in, I think it's beneficial. Um, I don't know that I don't know how it works, but I would imagine they're going to ask you as well as the SEDS data coordinator when there's special education questions. So just being informed is best. I think we do it sometimes. We've been to conferences thinking, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with special education. We don't need to talk about it much. There's always a need, there's always a thirst for special education when it comes to CalPADS, regardless of the audience. And I think as if you're the main data coordinator, even if you don't have special education under your belt, going to the weekly office hours on Monday is beneficial. And I think,
yeah,
I think it's natural to think I don't have to do it, but I think time shows that you should, be knowledgeable.
yeah. And Rebecca says there's so much my brain and memory can retain. Yes, we are all that. So that's why, just save this CDE box because, sometimes you can just go back. What did Dominic say or what was discussed here? You can always just go back and refer to documentation or send in a service ticket because we have a SPED expert, in-house expert here named Alex. That we could refer it to. I think Alex is here.
Yeah, she
I hope.
doesn't know. She's our SPED expert. She doesn't know that, but we've bestowed that upon her. It's like an honor we've given her.
Yep. Badge of honor. Yeah. All right. So um, that's error resolution. Once you've resolved the errors, then of course you're on your way to looking at the reports, syncing EOI 3 and 4 revisions. So, I mean, since end of year 3 and 4 go hand in hand, right? So you have Endeavor 3 has all of these incidents. It involves the enrollments too. Any changes in the enrollment statuses in end of year 3 will impact how you look at students and review students in end of year 4. So both has to be in sync, meaning if you certify end of year 3 with a revision ID, this revision ID, make sure that the end of year 4 has the same revision ID being certified. Okay? So just to make sure that you have all of your data included. All right. And so sometimes, right now I think end of year 4 already has a validation that would keep you from certifying if you don't exit the students. So it's basically one and the same now. So you have to exit the SANR. That way, it would allow you to certify in year 4. And so i- in year 4 and 3 go hand in hand now in terms of certification. And more so next year when in year 2, 3, and 4 are combined into a super, mega, ultra califragilistic revision. So anyway, Nate, your turn. Please explain away what reports they need to review.
Yeah, the 112, or is it, remember the SNR 131 in end of year 3? Make sure you exit the student as well.
Yes, yes.
But they're going to show up in end of year 4 now. Well, we have end of year 3 here, so maybe it'll show up. What are we looking for? Student not exited.
Yeah, that will be activated in end of year 4 as well. I think it was introduced in this week's deployment.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
we don't see it yet, but it's
yeah,
coming. But what Kyra was talking about, I have end of year 3 here and end of year 4 here, right? And we used to want you to complete all certifications and then do end of year 3, but the data wasn't consistent between. And then with end of year 4, some of the enrollments, right, students leaving are their exit reason for special education. And so there wouldn't be a valid reason or special education exit and report it and end of year 4 was certified because end of year 3 was not complete. Usually the last step for most people in end of year 3 is to exit all the enrollment. And so they're asking that you sync your certification. So if you scroll to the very bottom, you have snapshot history, right? The revision create date and the revision ID is used to confirm the same snapshot. So 4/22/25, 11 o'clock, 2978817. You can see that's over here on the right as well. So both of these, when you approve, should say LEA approved for both of these. So there's going to be some coordination, right? It's possible that the person who LEA approves end of year 3 and end of year 4 is not the same. And so you want to work with each other. If you are the same person, then you can control it. All perhaps you have to tell your special education person, I'm not going to approve the snapshots until they're both ready, and they should understand that. But that's what we're looking at. End of year 3 and 4 should have the same revision ID when you approve them. And then if you do disapprove one, remember that, right? Because now you probably will be asked if you disapprove one to disapprove them both. So I would recommend when you're in a position where you think you're ready to approve, place it in review, right? That way you freeze that snapshot and it can continue the process. But worst comes to worst, push comes to shove. You have that frozen set of reports that you can certify at any time. I would also say if you are getting down to the wire, certify what you can, right? We're asking you to sync your snapshots and your revisions, but if it's not possible, you need to certify what you can, right? So, um, it's a request. Next year, we're going to combine everything, so we won't have to make this request. But, that's what we're
You have
asking.
completed this module. Please continue to the next video. Thank you.